Charlton Singleton, and welcome to this episode of Raising the Volume. Today, our guest is the current associate conductor of our Charleston Symphony Orchestra. So we ask that everyone please welcome Kellen Gray to Raising the Volume. Thank you for being here, bro.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am especially grateful to you because for being here, because even in the midst of this pandemic that we've all been dealing with, I know your schedule still is pretty crazy with you know, a Zoom meeting here about whatever, another consultation about this, or you know, giving a talk on this, you know. So I clearly am in that same boat at times, and I know your schedule just from us talking so much off, you know, off the air and everything. So I thank you, man, for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I know your schedule is the same, so I'm just excited that we actually get to sit down and just chat for a little bit.
We were supposed to go to lunch.
We were supposed to go. Yes, yes.
So I guess this will have to. Well, I guess without the food, but this will be, you know.
And we still can.
And we still can.
We still can.
Right,
We figured
right.
out. Yeah.
Right. So now, you are from the state of South Carolina.
Yes. Yeah.
What part of?
I'm from, I guess you call it the Old English District. I'm from Rock Hill. I was born and raised
Hill.
in Rock. The Rock. Yes. Yes. I was born there. I stayed there from age 0 to 18. Rock Hill High School is where I graduated from. People would be upset if I didn't specify that, so I have to say I went to Rock Hill High.
Right.
And then I was planning actually going to South Carolina State. You and I would have been an alumna together, but changed my mind at the last minute. Ended up going to music school instead of studying biology at SCSU.
Biology. That's a switch.
That was that. Well,
biology to music.
I know. Well, the whole plan all my life was to be a herpetologist. Like I really planned on studying animals or specifically reptiles and amphibians or dinosaurs. So it was either herpetology or paleontology, one of the two. And it was around about midway through my senior year that I realized I didn't like doing math at all. Like at all. I could not stand math. I love it now, surprisingly. But so I was like, what do I really love to do? And I actually love to play the violin. And I was like, well, if I'm going to have to do something for the rest of my life, since that's what you're supposed to choose to do when you go to college, I may as well do something I like. And so it was playing the violin. And I really had no idea that you could really just do it for a living. I wasn't really planning on making the money with it. I was just going to do it because it was a career path. Yeah, I luckily, around that time switched violin teachers to Mr. Leroy Sellers, who's in Harrisburg, North Carolina, just on the other side of Charlotte. He was actually one of two musicians that integrated the Charlotte Symphony back in the 60s. And so he and I worked together, or he taught me like long lessons, Charlton. I'm talking about 3-4 hour long lessons.
3-4 hour lessons?
Yeah, lessons. And he wouldn't charge me a dime either for me.
Wow, now that's a blessing right there.
Yes.
Because I can recall how people would get mad at me when I would say, you know, how about an hour lesson? Hour lesson? How about 30 minutes? Wow, 3 hours. Oh, that's good.
Well, that's what I just come from a teacher who was really wonderful. We worked together for 45 minutes, and this is all still new to me. And I'm thinking like we got to be getting close to about an hour, and then like another hour go by, and eventually I discovered one lesson. There was a clock like kind of over to the right of me, and I was like, we've been here 2.5 hours. Like, but anyway, yeah, he was really wonderful, and ended up getting me into college and moving on to Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, and from there went on to Valdosta State to get a master's in conducting. 7 years in between those 2 degrees, actually. And then I was lucky enough to go back to Columbus State to do an artist diploma in conducting and simultaneously be a conducting fellow at Chicago Sinfonietta and be assistant conductor there eventually, right before I came here.
All right, so that's from pretty much leaving high school all the way up to now. Let's dissect all of that.
Okay.
Did you have like a musical family? You know, like for example, a lot of people ask me, you know, what was the musical climate? Did my parents play or anything? My parents did not. My sister was a cellist growing up in high school, and she was an all-state cellist. My brother, he played the violin. Well, he held the violin for a little while, but that wasn't really his thing. Sports was more so his thing. And I think that really hit home when he conveniently left it on the floor for my father to step on one time. Um, but anyway, but my brother ended
That's
up getting
brave.
a football scholarship and everything. But so I was, sort of the musician of the family.
Right.
Did you have anything like that in your family, like a strong presence of music?
Not a strong presence, but a presence. My father was kind of similar to your family. My father was both an athlete and a musician. So he was a music major in college. He was a voice major, but also on the football team. Don't ask me how you do that. Like
Actually, I know somebody else that's like that.
Really?
Yeah. Ruben Studdard.
Oh,
From American
Idol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He played on the football team, and he was a music education major. Yeah.
It sings like an angel. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and sings like an angel.
The
yeah.
velvet teddy bear,
Right.
they call
that
it.
is his nickname. That is his nickname.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So your father played and sang.
Yes, so he went to Johnson C. Smith University, which is how I got connected with that violin teacher, Mr. Leroy Sellers. Mr. Sellers was one of my father's professors in college, so just a real full circle for, I guess, for both of our lives. But yeah, so he was just always singing, whether in church or just around the house. In fact, one of my first childhood memories is seeing him in Ain't Misbehavin'. Probably at Winthrop University, I was probably 4 or 5 or something like that. It was a confusing experience because the image I remember the most is another woman sitting on my dad's lap and he's singing to her, and I'm just sitting next to my mom, and I'm just at 4 years old. I'm not really understanding what's happening.
Something ain't right.
Something ain't right.
Right.
But so music was always just kind of around, and like I went to the Liberty Hill Missionary Baptist Church in Catawba, South Carolina, and obviously music was a large part of the experience there, and him singing in the home, and he had a record collection that was stashed away in the attic, and I used to go up there and take records down and listen. So music was kind of just always around, but there wasn't necessarily, I didn't come from necessarily a musical family, so to speak.
Ain't Misbehaving. Yeah. I did a song just a couple days ago. I did Feet's Too Big. That's in my repertoire.
Yes.
That's my best.
I haven't heard that, and so your feet's too big.
That's
oh,
right.
my goodness.
That's a great one.
I'm going to have to listen to that when I get home.
So you, there's definitely a connection, in the family with music. How did you? I mean, I know that we have mostly you see violinists in the classical music world, obviously.
Right.
As of late, you see a lot of hip hop violinists, a lot of jazz violinists. As a matter of fact, I remember not that long ago we had here in the Gilliard Center, we had black violin that came through. They just got nominated for a Grammy. They're up for a Grammy. Yeah. So how did classical, music stick with you in this time of everybody gravitating toward more of the popular music styles?
Yeah. Honestly, just because I was too square to play jazz. That's really about it.
Hold on. See, I wouldn't have thought that because of the way we talk, and you throw all of these other, groups and bands and artists at me. Too square, really?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's like I love to observe it, and I almost, and maybe you can get me off of this. I'm a little bit stuck on something. So, I love jazz so much, but I love it to the point that I don't want to. How do I say this? I almost don't want to, I guess my love for it seems pure and as just an observer. I guess maybe on a beginner's level, I guess. Like I don't want to start, I almost feel like I don't want to start studying it because then I might, how do I say this? It might start becoming work for me. I have a real big habit, real bad habit of working on something really hard. So if I have like a fun project, it will soon come from a fun project to a perfectionist project.
I see.
And so, and believe me, I took, my senior year, so I'm gonna take us way off on the left field for a minute.
That's all right.
My senior year of college, I was supposed to take form and analysis.
Oh, I know well.
They weren't offering the class that semester, and so I go to the head of the school. I'm like, I need this class to graduate, but we're not offering it. He goes, oh, don't worry, we'll put you in jazz improvisation, ear training, and theory, which was all one class. And I was just like, but I don't play jazz. He's like, you'll be fine. And I was like, okay. And I had no reference frame for jazz whatsoever at the time, other than listening. And I was like, I'll be fine. I feel like I've done okay so far in music. Charlton was the
That's a
hardest
little
class.
different.
It's a little different. It was the hardest class I've ever taken. It was the hardest C I ever got in my life. I'm telling you, man. It was like when we had those ear training audits. It's like, okay, we need you to sing 13ths, and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't sing 13ths and 15ths, and it's like your improvisation audit for this week is we're gonna play. Oh gosh, I think was it Chick Corea, Return to Forever. And so he would play the head on loop, and then we'd all sit in a circle, and we'd have to go around and play our solos. And I'm just sitting here with my violin, just trembling. Oh yeah, oh man.
They chose Chick Corea.
Return to Forever.
The Return to Forever band. Ooh.
It was one of 4.
For those, okay, let's just put this into context for a second. That might be asking. That's like, and being a classical violinist. That could be like asking Frank Sinatra to sing Kiss. That really could be. That's or some Metallica.
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's
that's
just not quite the mix.
And that's probably about how it sounds when it came around to me. I can only imagine, and these were recorded, by the way, so we could go back and grade them. And just looking at his comments, I could just see probably just the shame. And he was just like, this poor kid's never going to make it. I hope he doesn't really think about pursuing jazz. But anyway, it was such a difficult class. And ever since then, I haven't really like gone back to try and study. Maybe I would love to actually, but I've tried to keep myself from being such a perfectionist about it and just really just loving it. So I don't know, maybe I might be less square than I think. Maybe you and I can work together or something. Maybe we can.
You need to listen to some Regina Carter.
I do love Regina Carter. Yes.
See? There you go.
And so she, oh man, I think it might have been my senior year of high school when she was awarded the canon for a year to work with. So Paganini's violin, the canon.
Yeah, Regina Carter is a fantastic woman, African-American violinist that specializes in jazz. So I suggest everybody check out some Regina Carter. So she, you were saying that? Yeah,
so every year, so Paganini, one of the great virtuosos of all time, had this violin, it's a Stradivari violin, which is now known as the canon. It's a wonderful violin. And every year, one violinist is awarded to perform on that violin for the entire year. This is a violin that travels literally with like two or four arm guards. I can't really remember. And she's the first jazz violinist to be awarded the violin to perform with for a year.
Now, I had a similar experience in Cheraw, South Carolina, or Cheraw, South Carolina, depending on who you ask and about how to pronounce it. But being that that's the birthplace and home of Dizzy Gillespie, when they have the South Carolina Jazz Festival, his niece usually comes down from Philadelphia, and she'll bring the horn, or one of his horns, and they'll have it on display. And I was a headlining act on one of the nights, and they said, you know, Mr. Singleton, we have Dizzy Gillespie's horn here. Would you like to play it?
How did you feel?
and I stood there for a second, and they said, did you hear? Oh, I heard what you said. You know, it was like, you can't say something different now. You know? And so I played the horn, and after the show, I had it, you know, just sort of sitting, you know, on a table, you know, and everybody was looking at it, and some of my recordings and everything. When we left town that night, I stopped at a, back up. Before we left the venue, there were a couple of South Carolina troopers that came in, and they took the horn.
Oh, okay.
You know, I guess to
protect it.
Yeah, protect the horn. And when we were leaving town, we stopped at a gas station, and I saw those two police officers, and I said, "Didn't I just see you? Don't you have the Dizzy Gillespie horn?" And one of them said, "Yeah, we." I don't know what you're talking about, sir. So I understand about guarding an instrument, but the Paganini, man, that's the real deal. So all right.
Yeah. I want to say I saw it may be on the album cover, either on the front cover or the back cover. She's standing with it, and the guards are on each side of her, like on the, 'cause I think there's like they have to keep a proximity around the violin, but it's just a really neat picture.
Right. So now I've always wanted to ask this question about becoming a conductor for an orchestra.
Right.
I know in the performance world of an orchestra, when you are auditioning for a chair or for a spot in that orchestra, that you go through a pretty rigid, audition process that has different rounds per se.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be different for a conductor because they are not per se playing an instrument per se.
Right.
But what is it that that an orchestra is looking for? When you have those sort of auditions, when you have down to the last 4 or down to the last 5 or however many conductors to choose from?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first thing is that there's actually the rounds are somewhat infinite because the process starts before you even show up. Many times when you're applying for a conductor position, you have to send in resume, video, there's going to be a cover letter. They might ask you for a repertoire list, many things. And so however many people apply, in fact, there's one audition I applied for that I made the finals of a couple years ago where 600 applicants applied. 600, yeah. Okay. And 4 of us were invited to the finals there. And so, razzle dazzle. Yeah. Thank you. No, so I imagine in that they have some sort of process to filter those 600 applications. And so I think, to my knowledge, they had 6 people on the search committee, and they split up 100 videos each, and they watched all the videos, and each, I think, proposed a certain number to move forward from the collection that they had. And then there's an internal conversation had about that many people, and then that somehow gets filtered out to the 4 they actually invite. 4 or 5. I think when I've made it to the final rounds, there's usually not been more than 4, I believe. Not been more than 5. And when you get there, there's many things. They obviously want to see how you conduct. There's an interview process, and where they would get to know you a little bit as a person. And both of those things, umbrella a lot. So obviously when it comes to the conducting, the orchestra wants to feel how you are, see how you interact with them, because I guess one of the misconceptions is that the conductor plays the orchestra, and really no, the musicians are doing all the playing and all the work. It's how you collaborate with them. And so it's not, you obviously have to have enough facility to conduct, well enough to get through the music, but it's really about how you're working with them. I think a lot about a conductor and the way a conductor might be like a construction foreman. You're not doing a lot of the actual labor, but it's how you're galvanizing your forces and how you're working with them.
Way to put it.
And so it's kind of a lot like they want to see your leadership style. They want to see how well you communicate, how you problem solve, and also how you navigate the music. And the same thing when it comes to the interview process. They're going to ask you, they're going to get to know your communication style while you're there. They're going to get to know you personally. And that gets to be a little bit different when it comes to an assistant conductor role like myself or a music director role, because obviously a music director role is a bit more leadership oriented, and you may bring a specialty that may add a new flavor to that orchestra, or bring something new to that orchestra. And they're really hiring you for your artistic vision, as opposed to an assistant conductor. You're hired for your chops and how well and efficiently you can work with your hands.
All right.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's perfect. I mean, that's well said, and that hits it right on the head. That explained a lot for me. It's like I said, I really have never spoken honestly with anybody that has done it on that side. I know a number of conductors, but I've never talked with them about that process.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier about, from basically high school all the way up till now, you mentioned the Chicago Sinfonetta.
Yes.
How did that experience come about? And winning that, and how was it, conducting with that orchestra or working in that organization?
It was a life-changing experience. Like, so much, not just of my musical life has been molded by that experience, but my personal life as well. First off, when I found out I got in, I couldn't believe it. I was it was a phone interview. I was in Valdosta, Georgia. I was doing my master's degree at Valdosta State and also serving as the assistant conductor of the regional orchestra. And we had a phone interview, was like the last round of the process to get accepted. And they told me, well, welcome to the program. We'll get back to you in a couple weeks. And they said goodbye and hung up the phone. And I was like, did they say welcome to the program? Did I?
Welcome to the program. Those are the magic words?
Yeah. I was like, I feel like, should I call them back and ask? I don't know. And so I sat at my desk for like an hour just wondering, like, what do I do now? But when I got there, I was immediately felt like I was welcomed into a family. The orchestra was founded by Paul Freeman, I believe, forgive me, Sinfonietta. I believe it was founded in 1985 or 4 or 3.
Early 80s.
Early 80s. It was founded in the early 80s, and specifically for the purpose of promoting diversity, equity, inclusion in classical music.
Awesome.
So Paul Freeman thought that there was not a mid-sized orchestra in the United States that really showcased the talent the diversity of talent that we truly have in the United States, not just of people, but in classical music, because there just weren't necessarily those opportunities. Again, if you think about in the 1960s is really when orchestras were just starting to integrate. So that's only 20 years of people that look like you and I, or even women in some cases, in orchestras. Mm-hmm. And so this orchestra specifically played a lot of music by black composers. It showcased a lot of African-American talent. And that orchestra grew very quickly and started touring the world. But as an offshoot of that project, Maestro Freeman started the project. Maestro Freeman and Chicago Symphony started the Project Inclusion Program, which also, again, promotes diversity, equity, inclusion in classical music, but also gives opportunities for those of us who might not otherwise get an opportunity. So there, not only was I able to sort of study and be mentored by May Ann Chen, one of the world's best conductors right now, but they also taught us, put us through a music director training program. So you learn philosophies in philanthropy, marketing, you learn how to mold your personal narrative, you learn about identity, which is the biggest part for me, is learning about identity. Like, I remember the first day I showed up and they asked me, so what has your journey been like as a black conductor? And I just sat there for a minute, I was like, I never really thought of myself as a black conductor. And they was like, okay, they were like, okay, stop. So first off, you are, and you mean to tell me that has not affected your course so far? And I had to think about it. And I was like, I guess it has. And so that was the start of reflection on how my path may be different than others who are not. And it's really sort of shaped my career, because it's gone beyond me just wanting to, how do I say this? Wanting to perform music and perform with wonderful orchestras, but it's gone to now creating a new path. Just like Paul Freeman's legacy is now going from the handful of conductors that were, black conductors that there were in his day. I think maybe, you think about his generation, you're talking about maybe Dean Dixon and Paul Freeman and maybe a couple others, to now there are many of us around the country, 3 of us from South Carolina, in fact.
I was gonna get to that. I had the good opportunity, thank you to the Post and Courier, to do a little short, I said it was a writing project for me.
And it was great. It was really great.
But,
a surprise even. So
yeah,
thank you again.
You're welcome. But I wrote about how in the state of South Carolina we have 3 African-American conductors that are all under the age of 40. And they are doing extremely well. We have Kellen, we have Joseph Young, who is from the Goose Creek, South Carolina area, but he is the music director. Is that the title?
He's a music director at Berkeley.
At Berkeley, in California. But then he also is at
he's teaching at Peabody Institute, and he was assistant conductor at both Baltimore and Atlanta as well. Yeah.
Right. And then we have Jonathan Hayward, who is from Charleston, South Carolina, and Jonathan is overseas.
Yes.
At
he was assistant conductor at the Halle Orchestra,
right,
in England, and now is and forgive me if I mispronounce this, Jonathan, but is the incoming music director of the Nordwest Deutsche Philharmonie in Germany.
Yeah. So, being that we have 3 homegrown, here, but there again, you still don't see, you know, a large majority. And to know that the Sinfonetta was, getting, getting through all of that, or at least presenting opportunities, that's always a plus. Now, one of the things that I also wanted to talk to you, and you mentioned this a little bit, because we've had the opportunity to present on a few occasions, and I noticed that when you get the opportunity, that you do highlight a lot of Black composers in the classical music genre,
Yes.
and arrangers. Can you talk a little bit about that, or some of those composers, and,
Sure.
and their importance, and why we should, recognize them and perform their work?
Sure. Well, I guess first addressing why we should perform them, because they exist. I mean, classical music should always evolve and grow, otherwise it will cease to exist, or at least it cease to exist to the wide platform that we hope it can survive on and sustain. It's a voice that we're missing. I think you can't really study the history of classical music, but not also study the history of its exclusivism that prevented certain voices from being on the stage. And those voices benefit everybody. So, for example, there have been composers of African descent since the 1500s, and on every single continent that exists. For example, there's a composer, Nunez Garcia, who was a Beethoven contemporary from Brazil. His music sounds very similar to Mozart. I don't want to call it Mozartian because it's not Mozart, it's Nunez Garcia. But you could most similarly relate it to the aesthetic of Mozart. Really incredible composer. But unfortunately, for many reasons, it doesn't get programmed. And specific to him, a lot of it is regional. Him being in Brazil is a bit isolated from Europe. Or you have other cases like with Joseph Bologna or Chevalier de Saint George, who we now recognize as one of the great early Black violin virtuosi and composers. He was an influence on Mozart, but he was also the music director of the Paris Opera. He was the one who commissioned the Paris Symphonies by Haydn. He was, I think, one of the first Black military generals in France, world fencing champion, swam the English Channel with one arm. I'm not making this up.
What?
Yeah, read his bio. It's crazy. It's the craziest bio. It sounds made up.
I'm still stuck on fencing.
He's like a world fencing champion at an early age. I think in his mid-teens or something like that, defeating grown men in fencing. He was an incredible athlete and musician. In fact, so famous that Napoleon couldn't reinstitute slavery in the colonies of France until after Joseph Bologna died. Yeah, and so when he did perish, he basically erased the country of his existence. Streets that were named after him, names changed, the musical works buried. And these are musical works that actually influenced Mozart. And so when you're looking at Mozart, to say that he exists in a vacuum, that he just popped out of nowhere, this perfectly formed classical genius, it's true that he was a genius, but he also, because of his genius and his virtuosity, was able to travel the world and was able to be influenced by many other composers, and specifically Joseph Bologna. So that voice is not heard. When it comes to more contemporary classical music, which I like to perform, especially by Black composers, it's a voice of music that I grew up with. I think in the concert we got to do most recently, which we should do more often, Call and Response, we did a piece, Adolphus Hailstork's Epitaph for a Man Who Dreamed. And the first time I heard this piece, it spoke to me very deeply, not just for its subject matter of it being about Martin Luther King, but the style in which it was written and the musical idioms in which it's based off of. So growing up in the Baptist church in South Carolina, there are certain musical traditions that we have. Definitely. And some of those idioms, the idioms that are in the music by Black composers and the idioms in which we sang in those churches come from the same source. It's early American songs and musical traditions that came really from West Africa, that came here to the Low Country, and is a very large part of Gullah culture, and has proliferated and expanded out into classical music. So when I hear the music of Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Adolphus Hailstork, Trevor Weston, Dr. Trevor Weston, Jesse Montgomery, T.J. Anderson, all these composers, I hear the voice and the same musical idioms I grew up on. And so it's something that I don't just promote it because I'm a conductor of color, but it's because the music that's intrinsic to my very soul, and that I understand on the level that I think I can translate immediately to an orchestra.
Now, we have a mutual friend in Conductor John.
JMR.
JMR. Yeah.
John Morris Russell.
John Morris Russell. He is the conductor of the Hilton Head Symphony Orchestra and also the Cincinnati Pops. And he told me of a composer, and I always forget the composer's name, but it had to do with the war and you did a piece when we did the Piccolo Spoleto opening,
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
First of all, tell me the name of the composer again.
James Reese Europe.
That's
is
right,
the name
James
of it.
Reese.
Yes.
All right, I got to tell you a quick thing. And I took a video of it and I posted it, but you were up there and you were conducting the orchestra, and it was one of these, nice moving tempo things, and everyone was sitting in the audience, sort of like this. Everyone was sitting straight up listening, except for my mom, who was on the front row, and she was like, all of these other people, I think the mayor was sitting next to them or something like that, and they were all just listening, and the music was great, and the orchestra was killing it, and everything, but my mom was just so animated, and I will always associate that piece with my mom like that now. But he told me a story. What's the story about him and the parade?
Oh gosh, well, there's so many stories about him.
There was one about them having the parade, maybe in Harlem or New York or something.
Oh, I think I know
up.
this story. I'm only vaguely familiar with, I think, that story. But the one, I guess, to tell everybody who James Reese Europe is.
Yeah, let's
So
do it.
James Reese Europe was I believe, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his exact rank. He may have been lieutenant and also band leader for the 17th Infantry Division in the First World War. So he was actually, ironically, maybe the person who introduced jazz to Europe. So I think it was it was that time during the war where Harlem wanted their own division or regiment of fighters in the war effort, because oftentimes the units were segregated.
Right.
And so for safety's sake, they wanted their own unit. So it was all black unit, and they went there. And not only they went there, but the U.S. basically pawned them off to the French side, ironically. And so, which they were well accepted there, but they turned out to be one of the most decorated units, decorated regiments in the entire war. So I think John likes to say that by day they were fighting the war, and by night they were burning up the jazz clubs at night.
Yeah.
I don't think there were any jazz clubs in Europe at the time,
right.
but when you listen to James Reese Europe's music, you hear American music, and you hear jazz, and you hear Harlem in there. So that march that we did, Hey There, you hear ragtime, you hear all the pre-jazz era forms within what we might think of as like a Sousa march, but you hear syncopation and you hear that early American music influence in it. I think it's just really incredible, genius music, just sort of wrapped up into what can easily be on surface confused as just a march.
Right.
But they're incredible military marches, and they used to all the regiments in the war used to have their own band, and apparently the Reese Europe band, they were called the Harlem Hellfighters.
Yeah.
Won every single competition, to the point to where when you read the historical documents, it says people thought that they had like trick instruments because they haven't heard music like that before.
Trick instruments.
I don't know. I don't even know how you do that.
Right.
Like a player piano, but it's like a player tuba. You just put it up to your mouth and you just hear 5-1 just churning out.
That's right. 5-1. That's good.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you don't. Well, it just depends on who the conductor is, but on occasion you may see conductors playing their instrument? Do you get to play a lot?
Ooh, for the benefit of everyone, I do not play a lot. Like, oh no, it's been a number of years since I've really played the violin seriously. You know, I pull it out every now and then just to figure out something in the score, like if I need to figure out how I want to explain this articulation to the group, or if I need to find a boeing, if there's a specific boeing I want there for the phrase, I might pull it out, but I don't really play in public anymore.
A specific boeing. So how does that work with you as the conductor, though?
So I try my best to not ever dictate boeings and things like this. So
Let's just, so we all, just make it all good. Explain what bowing is.
So boeings are exactly what you might think. With the string instrument players, they have both the instrument itself and the bow.
Right.
And so the boeings are what direction and what variety of stroke they're using to actually make the sound.
So it looks all uniform.
It looks all uniform. It sounds the same. So everybody's basically on the same page. You have what one person's doing, everyone's doing.
Right.
And so the thing about boeings is that technically you should be able to make any sound with any part of the bow and with a variety of techniques, but it's best if everyone's doing the exact same thing.
Correct.
And so there are certain bowings naturally that lend themselves to do certain things better. When it comes to crescendoing, it's usually easier to do on an up bow. When it comes to minuendo, it's easier to do on a down bow. So getting louder, getting softer from the heaviest part of the bow to the lightest. And so I might think that there's a specific bowing for the specific sound that I'd like in a place, or I think is the most appropriate. I usually leave that up to the concertmaster and the string players themselves, but every now and then, like in a blue moon, there might be just like, I think we just need to do it this one specific way, and that might be the one thing I like write in my score, and just like, if I just ask that they do it this way, and if I'm gonna do it, if I'm gonna ask them to do it, I need to actually like test it out, make sure it's what's really gonna happen, and it's gonna really work.
And that's an advantage of being a violinist.
Exactly.
With regards to preparing for a concert, on average, about how long do you prepare with, opening up the score and either a new score or revisiting an old, what's usually your process?
Oh man, so I have a strange process. Before I get into my strange process, I must say that the learning of a piece, as much as I hate to admit it, it's like your whole life.
Oh.
It really is your whole life. Like, we're soon at the CSO, this week actually doing Beethoven 6 and Schumann 3. I think I've conducted Beethoven 6 a number of times, meaning that I've studied it and been ready in case. I need to go up and conduct. And I found something new that I didn't notice before almost every time I've had to reapproach the piece.
Wow.
I feel like I'm one of the most meticulous studiers out there, and I often find, I wouldn't say that I don't find new things, but I find new perspectives still, like every time I reapproach the piece. But what I try to do in my own process is I try to absorb as many other interpretations as possible first. So I actually do a lot of listening without the score before I crack it open. I might, while I'm driving the car, while I'm like typing emails, like whatever, I might listen to 6, 7, 12 different recordings of the piece, different orchestras, different conductors. So I'm sort of just absorbing this amalgamation of what everybody's kind of done in the past. And I try to do as much of the landscape of perspective as possible. For example, if we're going to do Beethoven, I would probably listen to as early as possible of the orchestra that premiered that particular piece. So if it's a Beethoven symphony that was premiered by the Vienna Philharmonic, I might listen to the Vienna Philharmonic with Otto Werner Klemperer conducting, like so way back.
That's closer to
Exactly. So I would listen to that perspective. I'd probably listen to somebody a little further along in the 20th century. I listen to someone now, as many recordings as I can find. After that, I put the recordings away. I don't listen to anybody else. I'll just open the score, and I'm only receiving information that's on the page in black and white instructions from the composer. Because people, every recording you listen to is going to be a filter of their experience to the score, and I don't then want to be influenced by, by any specific interpretation. I'm just only going by the instructions that are on the page and allowing my filter to, speak there. So, and I spend, God knows, forever with the score, as long as possible. As far as studying it, and from there, I sort of go through, I like to dissect the piece, analyze it. You figure out what the form is, what the themes are, the harmony, and especially in classical music, there's always some sort of like little key or a little motive or theme that's sort of the overall principle of the entire symphony. And
Right.
so I'm really identifying what that is and how it relates to everything else. And from there, it's just memorizing it as much as I possibly can. Not memorizing all 100,000 notes that are on the page,
Right.
but memorizing all the themes, the entrances, the overall arc of interpretation, picking a tempo. And then from there, it's literally just as much as possible singing it internally and imagining and sort of visualizing the stage and the musicians that are going to be there and understanding the cues and all stuff like that.
How would you, and in putting all of that together, how would you describe your style of conducting? And when I say that, I mean like when I was a little boy, I could remember watching on PBS, you know, just they would always bring on, it seemed like Leonard Bernstein was there on the weekly, and he definitely had a style of conducting.
Yeah.
Dudamel today has a definite style of conducting. Younger, you know, Sir George Schulte had definitely a style. Some more animated than others.
Yeah.
How would you describe your presence on the conductor's podium?
Oh my gosh, you know, believe it or not, I've never thought about it. It's difficult, I guess, to describe one's own, or maybe it's not difficult, maybe I just haven't thought about it. But, you know, I would say my style, or at least what I consider, it's necessity-based. So I try to be whatever the music dictates.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, for me, I have a brief background in dance before I was a conductor. And so for me, a lot of time, it's dancing.
Salsa?
Salsa. Salsa, bachata, kizomba, son. Yeah, so a little bit of Latin dancing in my background. And
That's right.
Yeah. So I may have gone to a couple salsa socials in Charleston before the pandemic. Maybe even before I lived in Charleston. Maybe I drove over from Savannah to come over a couple times. Maybe there's a happening scene. Yeah. Anyway, so to me, a lot of time it's dancing before the music happens rather than with it, and not necessarily with my feet. But with my hands, with my torso, with my body. So I think one of the parallels between, let's just say, salsa. This was not a plant, by the way, y'all.
Yeah.
This is one of the parallels between salsa and conducting is that you're communicating with your whole body.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So often in salsa, we see all the flashy moves. You see the spinning, you see the footwork and everything. But really, the dance is actually happening like here. It's really in your feet and in your torso. Like the conversation is back and forth. With conducting and with music, they're not just following my hands, they're following the entire presence of my body. There's certain things that happen completely involuntarily because it's what I hear in the music and it's what I'm trying to dictate to the music or dictate to the orchestra. And sometimes you're just out of hands. So like sometimes a head nod might be it. Sometimes it might be something with this hand and something with this hand. But to me, I try to be as fluid as possible. And by that I mean as flexible and changeable as possible when it comes to the music. So whatever the dictates or whatever the music sounds like, I try to look like, I guess I should say.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So if we get like a really, you know, so when you're doing Mahler and it's really loud, you know, then you know, bang your head like, you know.
I try to look as imposing and forceful. I mean, I'm not a really imposing person to look at, but I try to be as how do I say this, muscular, imposing. Yeah, I would try to like look that way. In fact, this is another parallel I brought, I guess, from dancing to conducting, is that, again, wanting to be a scientist early on, I take a lot of lessons from the natural world. I don't know how much you've watched of the Planet Earth documentaries. And so in the Planet Earth documentaries, the David Attenborough documentaries, there's this one about birds of paradise. And about the mating dances of the birds and like how some of these birds have the strangest dances. Like one opens his wings up and he's a completely black bird but has two green dots here and he's like jumping up and down. And some of the dances are to make them look bigger. Some of the dances are to make them look more elegant or different postures and things like this. Anyway, I can go on about this forever.
Right, yeah.
But I take a lot of the conducting technique and also the dancing technique from cues in nature. Like the way, let's say in a particular Mahler symphony where something is supposed to be ominous, like danger is coming, the way a grizzly bear stands and expands itself to be as big as possible, I actually like to sort of look at that posture, like that's inherently, that looks dangerous, that looks imposing. What looks imposing about that? And sort of take a cue from that. So I know it's strange, it's quite unorthodox, but
if it works, it works.
It works, yeah.
If it's gonna enhance the music and the presentation, then all for it.
Yeah, yeah.
All for it. So, what's next on the horizon? I mean, I know we're still dealing with the pandemic, and like you said, there's a performance coming up with the CSO. How do you, as the associate conductor, even though you're always at the ready, what other things do you do to prepare? Do you for a performance, or in case something comes up? What's your process? What do you?
So my process for the just in case is actually just the same as if I was performing. In fact, internally, I pretend that I'm the one on the hot seat, that I am performing, just in case. It's the only way I feel I can sort of replicate that sort of readiness, is just to sort of internally assume that I'm going to be the one conducting. That way I can, when I'm asked questions by the music director or whoever's on stage of what's happening in the hall, I have just as intimate understanding, hopefully, as they do, or as if I were the one actually doing it. So I don't know, so it's just a bit more of a natural process for me. But what I'm really looking forward to is actually the launch of our youth orchestra season.
Yes.
So because of the pandemic, we didn't start youth orchestra back in August like we normally do. We're starting the last day of January this year. So that's our first in-person rehearsal with all the students, and I've missed them so terribly much. It's actually my favorite part of my job, is spending the time with the youth orchestra and seeing the students grow, from being so shy and worrisome with their instruments to really blossoming into young artists. And so we have a concert at the end of March in a bridge season that I'm just really excited to get started with them. But we have a full season from now to, I guess, the end of April or beginning of May with the CSO, and then a season with the youth orchestra from basically end of this month until end of March.
When I was in high school at Wando High School, I was a part of Youth Symphony, and but I played. I was the timpanist.
Really?
Yeah. I was the timpanist.
I had no idea you played percussion, sir. You do everything. You sing, percussion.
I just tried to be a little active, but we had a really large amount of trumpet players. At the time, our band director was in charge of the winds, in the Youth Symphony. And so he basically recruited, a lot of us to, and we had, I think we had 3 trumpet players, 3 or 4. And we were doing one particular piece, and there needed to be, some extra percussionists. Yeah. And I was like, I'll do it. So I actually covered like 3 or 4 different things. Timpani was the main one, but I had like the timpani here, and it was only like maybe 2 that I had to play. So I had the timpani here, I had the chimes over here, and I had a little trap table over here with a couple of other things. And I was just like, yes! Yes! Yeah. So I always love youth symphony, man. So that's awesome. One last question. As a jazz musician, a lot of times I get calls. People will say, they'll call me like in the morning and say, so and so is sick and can't make the gig. Can you come down here and sit in? Yeah. What's the latest time you've had to jump in, or have you had to do that before?
I've had to jump in before. So I have to say, mine was probably less stressful than other colleagues I know. There's another black conductor that we know, Roderick Cox, who's an American conductor based in Berlin right now. Before he left, he got a call like at sometime in the afternoon, and I was like, you need to be on a plane to Miami tonight to go conduct tomorrow morning. And scores were like already waiting for him. Apparently somebody got sick. For me, I got the call 5 minutes notice or so 5 minutes to the end of a break in a rehearsal to take over for a conductor who was ill and unable to finish the dress rehearsal and do the performance. So I was.
They were in the dress rehearsal with this conductor.
And they just weren't well, and so they basically just had to bow out, physically unable to perform the job. And so as we're sitting there, the executive director looked at me and goes, and we're sitting in the break, and I kind of had a feeling it was going to happen, and so luckily I was prepared, and so I walked over and he goes, "Can you take over?" And I was like, "Yeah, no problem." And we had an hour left in rehearsal, so we had an hour to basically cover the material to make sure we're all comfortable, and then we did the show a couple hours later that night at 7:30.
Boom.
Yeah.
A couple of hours. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. It was. I mean, you're surrounded by professionals. This is one of the things again. Like back to the construction foreman analogy. You know, you're surrounded by professionals and people that do their job really well. It's not your job to do the work. It's your job to galvanize them and enable them to do their work as best possible. So for me, it's just not getting in the way too much and being sure that they're able to do their job. So it wasn't too bad.
When I have situations like that, I walk in and I say, "How are we starting and how are we stopping?" Who do I look at for the cutoff?
You sound more brave than me because I may have, you know, now to think about it, I made that sound cool, but I was terrified.
Oh gosh,
terrified.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of unknown, and but like you said, everybody's a professional, and it usually works out just fine.
Yeah.
Well, my brother, I appreciate you doing this again, and you know, just your career has been awesome so far, and you're still young like that. Look at you. So your grandma always say, "Oh, look at you, so young, so handsome." Yeah. So you know, just good luck, and everything that you're doing has been awesome. We ask if you're locally here in the Low Country, you know, to come out and support, or just, you know, check out all the things that are happening with the CSO and the youth orchestra that Kellen is conducting. And once again, thanks, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a blast. We got to do that lunch sometime again.
Lunch, there you go. Where are we going to go?
My 3 sons. You want to try it again?
Sure, that works.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all. We appreciate you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.
I get scared sometimes.
But as I always say,
it's okay to be afraid.
as long as you face the fear.
And keep moving forward.
Wherever you are in life, count on the name trusted in insurance for over 70 years. BlueCross BlueShield of South Carolina.